Hello everyone, Gunnar here, and today I'd like to bring you a Harry Potter theory, specifically a theory about Voldemort. Specifically, a theory about Voldemort's Horcruxes, and if you want to get even more specifically, a theory about Voldemort's 6th Horcrux, and what that Horcrux was supposed to be. Very little is known about the creation of Horcrux, with J.K. Rowling refusing to give us any details. The only thing that we know is that it requires an act of horrendous evil, an act of murder, and a very complicated spell. However, we can learn a few bits of information about both Voldemort and Horcruxes by looking at the first 5 Horcruxes he created. The first Horcrux Tom Riddle made was the Diary, and this is one that we get the most detail of and probably the most interesting one. We see this one primarily in the Chamber of Secrets, and J.K. Rowling has confirmed that the death to create it was Moaning Myrtle, who was Tom Riddle's first ever kill. One other thing to note is that although the diary seems irrelevant, Voldemort would have assumed that it was going to be a massive historical artifact, as well as it being very important to himself. After the diary, the Horcrux he created was the Gaunt Ring, by killing his father. This is a significant item from his heritage and a significant kill for him. Then we progress onto the Locket of Slytherin, although this time the death was an insignificant Muggle tramp for some reason. The next Horcrux he created was the Cup of Hufflepuff, which he killed Hepzibah Smith in order to achieve this. She was the owner of the cup and descendant of one of the Hogwarts founders, so another significant death for another significant item. The interesting thing to note here is that again it is not by Tom Riddle's hand. Hepzibah Smith died by poison, and her house elf was the one that got framed and took the blame. Though it is left unclear as to whether this was Riddle tricking the house elf or whether it was something like the Imperious Curse to force it. Then we have the Diadem of Ravenclaw, which he made by killing an Albanian peasant. So of the 5 Horcruxes, all of them were significant items, which very much shows us that Voldemort wanted all of his Horcruxes to be significant major items. 3 of the items belonged to the Hogwarts founders, and 3 of them were made by significant deaths. Those that are not we'll come back to in a minute. So we can see that the pattern that Dumbledore deduces in Half-Blood Prince was good points. He says that he seems to use important items to make Horcruxes, and that he believed Voldemort intended to make his final Horcrux by killing Harry, the Chosen One, the final obstacle in his power, according to the prophecy at least.
Can live while the other survives.
The other important thing to note though is that creating of a Horcrux does not have to be a death by the killer's hand. Look at Myrtle, she died by looking a basilisk in the eye. Yes, the basilisk was under Tom's control, but still, this detail shows that it's not a bond with the victim or the death of the victim that splits the soul. It appears to be the mental aspect, not the actual death. So for each person committing a murder could be a different point of no return. You need to do the evil of ignoring the good instinct and killing. I would think that something like Draco, had he attempted but failed to kill Dumbledore by using the killing curse, might have had his soul still intact until Dumbledore was dead. But for Voldemort, the act of killing was so trivial, it would probably be the second he utters the spell. So the curse that was the act of murder was obviously the one intended for Harry, and we can make a bit of an argument as to whether or not it was the motivation of him having killed Harry, or whether it was the rebounding curse that was the death to create the Horcrux. Now for me, this summons a really big question here. Why is Harry the first and only accidental Horcrux to have ever existed? He's clearly the only one, because Horcruxes are barely known about. Voldemort didn't even suspect that Harry was a Horcrux until he explained it afterwards. If the only requirement was what happened to Voldemort, which was him dying and killing in the same second, then we've got to think about 3-way duels and wars and atmospheres like that, where it's very plausible that you can kill and die in the same second. I would assume that there's been at least a few dozen times that that's happened in the history of the Wizarding world, yet not a single accidental Horcrux. There's actually only one explanation I can come up with as to why there is no more accidental Horcruxes than just Harry, and that is that creation of a Horcrux has a preparation aspect. The way I imagine it, there's 2 parts: a preparation, which allows the soul fragment to leave the body and stay separated, and then a closure spell creating the Horcrux. But at the very least, that preparation part is basically confirmed by the fact there's no more accidental Horcruxes. This would also potentially explain why there is a Muggle tramp and an Albanian peasant that he killed. Voldemort wanted significant deaths, so although there is a chance that those 2 had a secret significance to Voldemort, it seems more likely that they got in the way of the intended target. That he'd done the preparation spell, but the tramp and the peasant got in the way and had to be killed. This then led them to becoming the victim that created the Horcrux. So what must have happened on the night that Harry became a Horcrux was that Voldemort killed Lily, then did the preparation spell to create a Horcrux, then tried to kill Harry. One way or another, the piece of soul that was supposed to become a Horcrux split off and latched onto Harry. So bear in mind that Voldemort must have been actively trying to create a Horcrux. He must have had an intended target to use as the vessel. Looking at his previous one, it's not that he accidentally makes them or makes them out of useless artifacts, so he had clearly done a lot of work to get his intended target. But what was he going to use? Now this part gets a bit speculative, but it would seem that he had a lot of time to track down the item of his choice, especially if you think that the last one he created was the diadem, which he was still going by Tom Riddle when he made that. So it makes sense he would have had time to get the desired item in his possession, or maybe track it down to the Potter's possession, or somewhere else in Godric's Hollow so that he could collect it that night. But by the time he killed Harry, he must have had it in his possession. He clearly wanted items that belonged to each of the founders of Hogwarts, and he was merely one item off of his collection, something of Gryffindor's. And Gryffindor's famous artifact was of course his sword. The sword would have been a perfect vessel, and I can see Voldemort doing everything in his power to get it. First of all, it's nearly indestructible, and absorbs only that which strengthens it, so it gets stronger and stronger and more indestructible as time goes on. Secondly, it appears to a true Gryffindor in time of need. This means it would be quite hard to track down if somebody was trying to find it. This would also allow the Horcrux to corrupt true Gryffindors, the best people, the natural enemies of Voldemort and Slytherin, because as we saw with the locket, it was able to cause anger and corruption. This would also explain why the significant item is still not there. If it had been found, it would have been removed, and if it was not, then it would have been teleported to Harry in the Chamber of Secrets, or another Gryffindor in the past, and then to Harry. But where could Voldemort have gotten the sword from? We know it appears to true Gryffindors. Well, that's quite an interesting question, and it's actually quite simple. Where would the true Gryffindors be? Well, they'd be fighting in the front line against Voldemort himself. I'd argue that the one who has the sword would be right on the front line, would be the one that is actually fighting Voldemort. Until, of course, Voldemort kills them, and then Voldemort has the sword in his possession. There is also another argument that it may have actually been in James Potter's possession at the time that he died. Of course, Voldemort would have then removed the sword in order to use it as a Horcrux. Bearing in mind that James has thrice defied Voldemort, not only does that indicate that he could be the sort of true Gryffindor that could have the sword, it also means that if he does, Voldemort's likely to know he does. I find it quite interesting to think about what would have happened if Voldemort had succeeded, even more than just the fact that he would have made the Horcrux and there wouldn't have been the chosen one. The sword would have then become an artifact of evil. It would have been something that presented itself to true Gryffindors and then secretly corrupted them. This could very much have actually been the turning point where Voldemort goes from almost won to actually won. But that's just my thoughts. I'm sorry it's not really a very cohesive theory, it's very much reliant upon prior theories working, but I think it's a very interesting train of thought and a very interesting way it could have gone. Let me know what you think down in the comments below though. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? If you disagree, what do you think the truth is? Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time. Imperio! You will like this channel, you will subscribe to this channel, and you will share it with your friends!